So I've made a bunch of wedges from a cube with an FFD deformer, put them into a cloner, create this kind of a UFO base shape. And if I look at my reference picture, I've got this top sphere that has little wee spheres cut out of it, and these two bottom parts which look like kind of inverted cones with bits cut out of them. So we need to find out how to cut stuff out of other stuff. So what I'm going to do just as a test is I'm just going to open a new scene here, and under my Create menu, under Modeling, I've got this tool called Boole, which stands for Boolean. And Boolean functions are where you take two objects and you add them together, or you subtract them, or you intersect them. It's a sort of a mathematical function that we can work with in Cinema 4D. So I'm going to create this Boolean, and just as a test, I'm going to create a cube and a sphere so I can actually see what this Boolean does. So once I've figured out what this Boole thing does, then we can use it in our UFO. So that's just under the Create menu, under Modeling, Boole. So let's create a cube. Here's my cube. I'm just going to move it off to one side, and I'm going to create a sphere. And the way that we use these with the Boolean is that we drag and drop the two objects into the Boolean. So let's drag and drop them both into there, and something odd happens here. So let's have a look. What is this Boolean actually doing? If we select the Boolean, what it's saying is Boolean type A subtract B. So it's taking one shape and subtracting the other part out of it. Now at the moment, my two shapes they're apart. But if I select my cube, which is currently invisible, and if I move it towards the sphere, as it starts to intersect the sphere, it actually is cutting that sphere out. So what we're doing as a Boolean is we're using one tool to cut out a shape from another tool, for another shape. So in this case, the sphere is being cut away by the cube. Now it doesn't matter where I shift that cube. I can put it on all different positions. I can get an interesting little wedge shape. So this is a really powerful tool for modeling. Now straight away that makes me think, when it comes to UFOs, we can have a big sphere and we can use a little sphere to cut out a hole. And these holes look pretty regular. They look like copies all the way around, and that's what cloners are really good at in MoGraph. We could clone a whole bunch of spheres and use them to cut out from another sphere. So this is a really super handy tool. So with our Boolean, if we just come back to that for a second, just make my cube a little bit bigger. So this is A subtract B. So A is the sphere, B is the cube. So this sphere minus that cube. We've got a couple of other settings. We can do a union, which joins them together. We can do an intersection, which is the shape formed where the two of them cross over each other. So that's kind of interesting. And A without B. That creates a hollow shape. So the union and the subtraction tend to be the subtraction probably seems to be the most common way that I'd use this. Okay, so now that I know I can do that, let's jump back to my UFO scene and let's see if I can make that work. So I need a big sphere for the center of my UFO, so let's just create a sphere. And I'm just going to lift mine up just a little bit. I'm just going to make this a little bit smaller actually. That one's a little large. Now I can change all this at a later date. I can fine-tune this if I need to. Okay, so there's my main sphere. The other thing I'm going to do is I'm going to put quite a few more segments in this so that the sphere is nice and smooth. At the moment it's not super smooth, it's a little angular. So I'm just going to add, I don't know, let's put maybe about 50 segments. Okay, I might turn that up a little bit more even. Might go up to maybe 80, put it nice and smooth. Okay, so I want to make a little circle. I want to use a cloner to make a ring of them, and then I want to use one of those Booleans to cut them out. So let's see if we can get this working. So I need a little sphere, so create another sphere, and this one I'm just going to lift it up so I can actually see it, so it's not in the middle of my UFO, and I'm just going to make the radius quite small on this one. Mine's going to be about, I'll start with about 5 centimeters. Obviously, we can change all these things, all the settings, the sizes, things like that. So what I try and do with Cinema when I'm building things in 3D, I try and just build a system, just get it working, and then fine-tune it after that. Okay, so I've got my sphere, so let's make a cloner so that we can make a ring of these spheres. And what I might just do is do some renaming here so that I can understand which one's which. This little sphere, that's going to be called, let's just call that a window sphere, just so I know which one that is. And so let's go to our MoGraph menu now and let's create another cloner. And because I'm getting a couple more cloners in my scene, I'm going to rename this cloner. This will be the window cloner. And I'm going to put my little sphere into that cloner. Okay, and again, I might just lift that up just so I can see it. So the cloner is doing the default thing that cloners do, and that is to make 3 copies stacked vertically in the y-axis. So I want to go to that window cloner, and in its object tab, rather than a line, a linear row of clones, I want to make a ring. The same way that we did with the main body of this UFO, we'll change that linear to a radial. Now I want this ring of spheres to be sitting flat. Mine is sort of standing up in the air, so under the object tab of that cloner, I want to change the plane that these are being rotated and cloned on. So it's not XY, it's not ZY, it must be XZ. Yep, there we go. Now I want a whole bunch more of these clones. Let's have about, I don't know, 16 maybe. And now that I've got this nice ring of little spheres, I need to position them so that they're going to cut into my main body of my UFO, this main sphere in the middle. So what I'm going to do is I'm just going to move my cloner down. And the other thing that I can do, because when I bring it down, they're sort of disappearing inside that sphere. Our cloner, when we select it and look at its object tab, it has a radius setting. The radius is how far or how wide this ring of clones is. So I can mess around with that radius, and if I just make it quite big to start with, then I can bring this ring of clones down and then just adjust that radius inwards until they sort of start clipping into the main part of the UFO there. So they're just starting to intersect and cut into that. That's looking pretty good. So I've got the big sphere, which is the UFO. Might just name that. I've got the little sphere, which is the window, and I've cloned that in a ring, in a radial array, and I've just positioned that around there. So that's looking pretty good. So now I should be able to use that Boolean tool. So let's give this a try. So create modeling Boole. Now, the two things I'm going to be subtracting is I've got the main UFO sphere and the cloner. So here's my main UFO sphere, here's my cloner. So I can select them both and just drag and drop them into that Boolean. And I get the opposite of what I was wanting. So now we need to just work on this Boolean. The other thing that's important is the order of these two objects inside the Boolean. So remember, it's A subtract B. So what I want, I want the big thing. I want the big UFO part, and I want to subtract the windows out of it. So I'm going to change the order of the cloner in the sphere inside my Boolean. And now, if I just turn off the lines in my view, that's looking pretty good. So I've got my Boolean. It's A subtract B. The first shape is the UFO sphere. The next one down is the cloner. So this minus those spheres. So the great thing now that I've got this set up, I can go back to my my spheres that are in my cloner for the window size, and if I change the radius of those, I could make my spheres and my windows bigger or smaller if I wanted to. I can change the radius of that cloner, which will just change where those spheres are if I need to, but I'm pretty happy with that. And I might just have a few more windows as well, so maybe I'll have 20 in my clone count. And maybe I might put them a little lower as well. So that's looking pretty good. So I've got my Boolean, here's my main UFO sphere, and then the cloner of all the little window spheres.